More than 50 years ago, I visited Ireland on holiday and learned of the enigmatic Dry Canal, the Cong Canal, and wondered what was the cause of its failure as a waterway. And so I used a recent visit to film it and record much of its remaining infrastructure and to find out more about why it failed and what has happened to it since the building of this canal was abandoned. The canal was part of a bold scheme to link the Atlantic Ocean with Lough Corrib and Lough Mask, and with the potential to head further north to open up the inland area of Ireland for commercial traffic to access the Atlantic Ocean. Its primary purpose was to serve as a drainage channel, with the additional benefit of providing a navigable link between the two lochs. It would allow the levels of the lochs to be controlled more accurately and help alleviate winter flooding. In this aim it has succeeded, even though as a navigation this canal did not succeed. Local folklore gave it the name the Dry Canal. It was reputed that when the canal was open to traffic, water was admitted and promptly flooded away through the porous limestone, thus preventing its use for navigation. This assertion is incorrect. The canal was never filled with water and never used as a navigation, and we'll find out later in the video what the pitfalls actually were that prevented it from being used as a functioning navigation. The building of the canal commenced in 1848 during the time of the Great Potato Famine, so it was a valuable employment resource in the area, employing more than 300 people at times. The project ended in 1854 with abandonment due to engineering problems, but it was disguised by the politicians as something else. The nature of that engineering problem and the consequent abandonment of the project will become apparent later in the video. Unusually for the time of year, the channel was still in water, which had been caused by the excessively wet spring, or so I was advised by the local residents. The first point to visit is Loch 1 in Cong, which is adjacent to Ashford Castle, which is now an exclusive hotel, and for which this bridge was constructed after the canal was abandoned. The entrance to Loch 1 is quite narrow and heavily overgrown, but can be seen quite clearly from the bridge. This is Ashford House, circa 1868, after the canal was abandoned, later much extended to become the castle. Here we find our way through the undergrowth to have a look at the remains of Loch 1. It's easy to access, although the growth is quite heavy. Looking to the right into the chamber, you can see where the lock gates were hung, but subsequently removed. But the chamber is now heavily overgrown and once was used as a boathouse, as seen in this picture from Peter Dillon's book. We now head towards the site of Loch 2, and there is a road running to the east of the river here, which allows you to walk parallel to the course of the cut, which can be seen in places through the trees. As we approach what was the site of Loch 2, we find there is now a large car park. Loch 2 was never completed, though most of it was built. It would have been situated with the bridge on its approach, which was constructed when the canal was built to provide a road detour. This is the site of the tail of Loch 2, with the bridge in the background. To its right is the car park, which is a good spot to base yourself to explore this end of the canal. On the left-hand side of the car park are recycling bins which are close to where Loch 2 was situated. At the top of the car park you'll find capping stones removed from Loch 2 when it was filled in. Immediately to the north is the aqueduct, with a large pool to the right fed from the limestone pavement through which the water seeps, and a mill stream to the left. Further information about the canal here is well worth reading. The aqueduct itself has been formed into a road which leads towards the next site of interest. To the left here we see the mill stream and water flowing through from the pond and underneath the aqueduct towards the village. Walking north through the aqueduct, we head towards the single most impressive remain on the canal. Off to the left here you will see the mill stream, but we continue north now, finding our way through the grass and undergrowth towards this remaining magnificent structure. This is revealed to us slowly. It is the magnificent remains of Lough 3. Here we see a picture taken from Maurice Semple's book, with the chamber much less overgrown. Notable for its construction from huge blocks of stone, here we see the gate recesses. This lock never had the lock gates hung, but they were constructed. Now we look upwards at the point at which the lock gates pivoted within the curved recess in the stone. The chamber is most imposing, but sadly now heavily overgrown. It does have some water at the bottom, unsurprisingly. And now we look back towards the entrance of the lock and in the direction of the aqueduct. An overhead view of the lock shows its massive structure, hugely thick stone walling. Unusually, there doesn't appear to have been any backfill behind the lock walls themselves. This is a view now from the top end of the lock, looking back towards the lock entrance and the aqueduct. Again, an overhead view of Lough 3 shows its massive scale, and we pan upwards to see where the drainage channel and canal are headed ultimately, Lough Mask, in the distance. This view of Lough 3, and in the background of Drumshiel Bridge, is very revealing without the undergrowth. We can now follow a path with care along the bed of the canal towards Drumshiel Bridge, and this reveals some very interesting artefacts along its route. Here we see the massive depth of the channel carved through stone with great effort. This is of great interest, showing the holes which were drilled for the blasting operation. The drilling was done with devices called jumpers, which were pieces of steel sharpened at the end and driven into the stone by hand with a large hammer, and which jumped and were turned after every stroke to drill the hole into which blast charges were placed. Now we take a look at Drumshiel Bridge, difficult to see because of all the undergrowth. This picture from Maurice Semple shows it with less growth and gives us a better perspective. Drumshiel Bridge is where the navigation starts, and where the drainage channel heads off to the left and down to the mill streams at Cong. Here, to maintain the water level in the navigation section, 2 weirs were needed, one here and one here. Note the peaty colour of the water and the relatively gentle flow, seen from the adjoining lane along which you can walk. Presumably this would have been much faster when the water levels were higher in winter. There is lovely stone walling that borders the canal with a clear high tide mark. Note the houses on the right here. During the late 1970s, blasting was done so as to improve the flow through the channel. Not as well controlled as it might have been because some of the shards of rock reached the houses. Now we head north towards Carrownagower Bridge. Access to the canal on foot here is not possible because all the land is privately owned and there are no paths, unfortunately. The bridge itself was constructed in about 1861 after the canal had been abandoned, which is why it doesn't have a suitable navigation clearance. Prior to its construction, there was a temporary wooden road bridge here, which was put in place whilst the canal was being constructed. There's a strange ramp that leads up from water level to the road level, and I don't know its purpose. This is the canal foreman's residence, and it remains in the same family ownership today. Just to the west of Carrownagower Bridge, in the driveway of a house, there is this structure, which apparently was a gunpowder store. The channel to the north of Carrownagower Bridge is again deep cut into the rock, and here we see an example of what limestone pavements do in terms of water permeability. Now we head north from Carrownagower Bridge towards the sluices. It is possible to walk along the canal here on the eastern side for some distance, before a gate halts your progress with a private property sign posted upon it. A view now of Lough Mask and the sluices and Castle Lake to the right, and the embankments. The sluices were constructed after the canal project was abandoned in order to provide some degree of control over water flow out of Lough Mask heading south towards Cong. These sluices are long since abandoned, and attempts at water regulation using sluices are now long forgotten. It's a fascinating structure with gear wheels and racks and crumbling timber stark against the skyline. Here the water flow south is considerable. This picture from the website Irish Waterways History shows it when it is in a drier state. Heading northward towards Lough Mask from the sluices, we see the embankments fully formed on the left and partly formed on the right. These were to protect boats as they passed through Castle Lake. Here we have the channel cut through and further channel cut through the rock to provide the means of water flow out of Lough Mask. Below us we see an eel weir which was constructed some time ago, but its use is now illegal. And a look back from the northwest over the eel weir with an angler busy down below. So now we look south to understand why Peter Dillon considers there were engineering problems with this drainage channel and canal. This land below us now used to be completely underwater and provided a regulating means to Lough Mask to the north. It acted as a dam retaining the water at a certain level, but this level was compromised by virtue of the channel having been cut. As a result, as the level of Lough Mask dropped in the summer, it would reach a point at which there would not be sufficient water in the drainage channel and the canal to allow navigation, so it would have been a huge embarrassment. Peter Dillon believes the situation need never have arisen. The canal was originally intended to follow a different route to the east of Castle Lake, along a line indicated by the two red arrows. The plan was varied for reasons which are not known, but had this route been taken there would not have been the means for uncontrolled water loss from Lough Mask, and the canal would have been built and succeeded, at least in being completed. Rather than face a political embarrassment, it was expedient to blame the failure of the canal not on engineering failure, but on its prospects. It was stated that these prospects were threatened by rail competition and hence little prospect of enough traffic, that labour costs were rising, and it was cited inaccurately that the construction was far from complete. So without ceremony, the project died. If you'd like to discover more about the Cong Canal, I can recommend 3 excellent sources of reference: the website Irish Waterways History, a book now out of print called By the Corribside by Maurice Semple, and Peter Dillon's book about the canal entitled The Cong Canal, Mystery of an Abandoned Waterway. Full particulars of these books and references are in the description of this video. I'd like to finish with part of the closing passage from Peter Dillon's book. He writes, "The Cong Canal is overgrown now, partly demolished and almost forgotten. The memories too have faded of starvation, unremitting toil, death, emigration, heartbreak. The winter rain still falls, though, on the plains of Mayo and on the unmarked graves of the famine dead. It accumulates in Lough Carra and Lough Mask and enters the Cong Canal through the stone pillars and rusting gates of the abandoned sluices. From the pools of Cong, the water slips by the bustling village. Gently it flows past the ruins of the Augustinian Abbey and the forlorn entrance to the canal at Loch No. 1, and departs with its memories and its story through Loch Corrib to the sea."